Welcome to the Argus Hydrogen and Future Fuels podcast. My name's Tim, and today I'm joined by Vikram Anenden, the manager of Synergen Met. Welcome.
Hi Tim, it's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see you in person again.
So, we're here today to talk about pyrolysis. I'm excited. Obviously, it was great to meet the first time. I wanted to have a conversation with you since on the podcast, so thank you for coming in. And this is the first face-to-face podcast we've done before, so this is an inaugural one.
Wonderful.
Tell us a little bit about what your company is doing in this space.
Okay. So Synergen Met owns the proprietary information on methane pyrolysis. So they've been developing methane pyrolysis now for a number of years for different applications. And over the years, we've realized that we're producing an essential commodity here, which is hydrogen. And we're producing it in the absence of CO2. So our system has no oxygen in there, and we produce carbon black. But more importantly, it's our approach to decarbonising the industry. So Synergen Met's view is that we use opportunities, where there is methane as feedstock, and help companies define their pathway towards decarbonising the industry. And we're using this application, so we're designing this application with the intent to have it modular and scalable, but also fitting into existing infrastructure, which is really important to us.
So let's dial back a little bit and get back to pyrolysis. So everyone understands green hydrogen, the electrolytic route, well understood. The blue hydrogen, whether that's steam methane reformation or autothermal reformation, both of these production paths have had lots of airtime. Pyrolysis to many is something more of a mystery. So this is about the decomposition of methane into hydrogen and solid part carbon. There are three ways of getting there. There's catalytic, there's thermal, and there's plasma. Thank you. Can you break each of those down for me from a very high level?
Okay. Well, I can talk to you about the approach that we take, which is plasma. So we use methane and we feed it through a plasma system. And essentially, the plasma system uses the fourth matter, which is ionization. So it's ionizing the methane gas that runs through it. And it runs through, just to paint you a picture, we've got a plasma torch, which is relatively the size of my arm, about 300 wide. And we run the methane through a specific point, and it hits the center of the arc that's being formed. And the temperature at the center gets pretty high. But overall, on the exterior is about 1500, but it can reach up to 10,000 degrees. And what that does, in essence, is breaks down the CH4 into carbon black and hydrogen. And the system itself is, we're able to start and stop the system off because it's got a feed point. So it's not like, it's a system where it takes latent time to start up and start down. So it's, very much in that way directly applicable. And so the system itself, just breaks down the methane into its core elements.
Very cool.
But, it's also the important thing to notice is that there is no oxygen in the system. So with the absence of oxygen, we were able to produce carbon black.
Sorry, as an 80s child, I was grinning like a kid, just at the word plasma. Very exciting. So from the perspective of technologies, this is, I'm not going to say old school. I think this is the route that Aker took in the beginning, the plasma route, Monolith, which everyone knows in the States. Gazprom's toying with it. And so that's the route that you're taking. So can I ask, what is special about your technology route? Is there some magic sauce? Is there some sort of updates that have happened? And I don't want you to go too in depth, obviously.
Yeah, sure. The magic happens in Knowhow. So we've got an excellent team working both in Australia and in America. And we've done a lot of work with the University of Queensland to refine the process. So the know-how is in the application itself. And I think that's what, really puts us really at the forefront, is that we are, commercially ready. And we have, trials and pilot plants in place. And we're really focusing on scalability once we understand what the sector or the industry is, looking at the quantities of hydrogen. So, for us, it's not as much as hydrogen production per se as opposed to decarbonising. So we're really trying to take the CO2 gas and put it into solid black.
And that's a very specific thing to use. So one of the things I always talk about is the shape of the cost curve. Obviously, the volume is dominated by blue and green hydrogen, essentially. But what I often talk about, or I often speak to people in the industry who are developing hydrogen production, and a lot of the low-cost routes are by biogenic routes and other ways as well, but smaller volumes. You're not coming at this from a hydrogen production standpoint, I suppose. Is that fair? Because you're looking at the carbon black, aren't you? And you're looking at decarbonising production.
I can talk about the carbon black a little bit later on once we get to that stage. But, our applications right now aren't for large-scale hydrogen production. We at Synergen don't believe the industry is there for large-scale export. The infrastructure is certainly not there in place yet. So in the interim, the company's vision is to decarbonise hard-to-abate sectors. And we have a lot of them in Australia, especially with, the CSG industry.
Yes, yeah.
Methane is one of our primary resources. So, if we focus on those sort of opportunities, we're also building global opportunities as well.
So this is partly then, this is realpolitik, because you are looking to come to market now, and obviously a lot of the things that we're talking about are geared towards not 2030 necessarily, but 2027-8, which is obviously further dated. And you're looking, just to be clear, at helping companies looking at their 2030 ESG goals and decarbonising operations.
That's right. So, as many countries in the world, they're all establishing their own hydrogen strategy and their pathway in terms of their CO2 emissions going forward. Various states in Australia, they start from 2030 and then come down. I think ACT is probably 2027 in terms of what they want to achieve. And we are seeing the results that they're aspiring to reaching 2027 in the economics where we are right now. So I'm glad to be able to discuss the economics and what we project in terms of carbon cost of hydrogen, because it will be extremely competitive, and with time as well, as usual economic side does get more competitive as well. So we're not really in this to compete directly with the other types of hydrogen production. And, even I was talking to you before about this, Tim, the biggest takeaway I took away from the Hydrogen Summit in Rotterdam was that it's really important to have the view where we are, colour agnostic. It's important to see how is it that we can abate the sector, how is it that we can, lower our CO2 emissions, whichever technology is available. And that is Synergen's approach as well. It's a technology that's available, that's ready, and it can be fitted into your existing infrastructure. The footprint, so the carbon footprint that we occupy as well is much less than setting up an electrolyzer plant around. So immediately, if you were a gas entity, you're looking to lower your CO2 emissions, this is a perfect fit, because immediately you have the coffee, you've got CH4 as your feedstock, and you're reducing your CO2 emissions.
Yep.
Or instead of venting, mining companies are particularly interested in this, because instead of flaring or venting their methane.
I've been speaking to a few about this in Australia as well. So you're talking about the thermal, but also particularly the met coal side of things as well.
Absolutely.
They're looking at their emissions and going, scope 1 and 2, what can I do here?
Yeah.
And these are the type of applications that you're particularly thinking of.
That's right. And, we're refining exactly how is that we are producing these units so that it works in the favor of an operator for it to be in situ as well. So, it has to be, highly modularized, scalable, and replicable as well.
Yeah.
That's where also the cost curves come down.
It's really interesting. So, actually, before we had this conversation, I always had the consideration in the back of my mind, why choose pyrolysis over SMR or ATR? To your mind, actually, you're not looking at this as a dust-up necessarily. You're looking at this as rather complementary. You're just drawing a distinction at this point of the evolution of the market between national level markets in nation versus export opportunities.
I believe so. It doesn't help the industry for proponents to come forward and start competing in the sense where one is more favourable versus the other. I think it needs to be a collection, it has to be a portfolio of how we decarbonise the sector. I don't think that there is one versus the other, one's better than the other. We sure have to look at the economics, especially from an investment perspective. But then again, how long is your return? Electrolyzers favour long-term capex investment. But if you've got an existing plant that needs to meet its targets, then this fits in, seamlessly.
Well, I suppose, I think you're quite right. I think the first year or two that I spent looking at hydrogen, it was listening to a series of bolder and bolder claims over the lowest cost of production. And so there's a limited road in going down that. But there is something very specific in carbon intensity. And it's absolutely preaching to the choir here about getting away from the colours. But the carbon intensity of production is crucial. And I wanted to just focus a little bit just on, I suppose, with the pyrolysis route, you're actually looking at a mass balance where you come out and say, these are my inputs, these are my outputs. This is tangible and I suppose visual in a way and directly measurable. And that is something which people are very interested in because carbon capture and storage, it's been around for a while, as has pyrolysis, but there is some skepticism around it in the market. And I think that a lot of people are looking at pyrolysis and thinking that's something where I can actually weigh the carbon at the end. And so from that perspective, a lot of skepticism may be evaporated.
No, the sentiment that I'm gauging from good discussions is, okay, we're opening up now a first generation market of carbon black. What does this market represent? What is the future growth of the market? There are concerns that, producing that much of carbon black is going to collapse the carbon sector. That's not.
And this matters to you because of your business model, and I know this because of the conversation we've had. Right. So, do you want to explain very briefly what your business model is? Because you're not actually producing hydrogen per se. You're more technology process licensing or something.
That's
like that.
right. So we run off different commercial models. Our primary objective is to work as a joint venture partner with operators. And that offers two things. That offers one, a confident sentiment that, we are partnering with the entity to reduce their carbon emissions. And two, is giving us a paying gains sort of involvement in the whole process. So that is our approach. We would also, offer licensing options too, but that is still yet to be determined going long term and what the production scales and the volumes are looking like. Like I tell you before, the hydrogen production, the volumes per day is still relatively unknown from companies. It depends on the applications. A lot of the remote operators are looking at producing, hydrogen for mobility, but still that infrastructure is not in play yet. So, what is the volumes of hydrogen that they require per day? Are we looking at a ton of hydrogen? Are we looking at 4 tons? So, from that perspective, we need to keep in mind that we need to scale it for the various application, but also have a long-term view. Okay, what is that sort of range we're looking at? And what do the economics look like in that going forward? And what's very important is understanding the quality of carbon that we're producing. So dialing back, the quality of hydrogen that we're producing is 99.99% pure, grade 1, fuel cell quality. So there itself, we can utilize the hydrogen for mobility, for light vehicles, heavy vehicles, depending on the utilization for it. But the questions that are coming from more specific from hydrogen is, okay, how long can we store it, and what is the quality of hydrogen?
Yes.
Then, of course, the next part of it is the carbon black. So we are producing, by molecular weight 3 times more than what we're producing hydrogen. So, assuming that we're producing just under 4 tons of carbon black per day, what is the application for it? Depending geographically where you're located, like in South Africa, there's an emerging market there, and they use it for, multiple applications. But, when I look into, okay, what is that first generation market? What is that looking like? And we're suddenly tapping into now a 15% market cap of the price of carbon, graphene. And what does that price look like? And we're looking around about $10,000 to $15,000 per ton. To give you a bit of perspective, the carbon black right now is probably sitting at $350 to $500 a ton. So there's a significant, leap forward in terms of price that we're trying to achieve. Yeah. Now this comes back to, okay, what is the grade of carbon that you're producing? So carbon is typically graded from 1 to, I think it's 9 or 10. But now, okay, that 9 to 10 range is suddenly hitting into a graphene market. And we're, I'm getting, interest from semiconductor sector, from lithium ion batteries, more so in Korea, Southeast Asia, in the Americas as well. America more notably in solar panel production as well.
Yeah.
So, there's an emerging market. It's growing. And, the market won't grow without understanding what the volumes being produced per day are too.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of talk about the chicken and the egg, but I think, if one is sort of put forward and developed sufficiently enough, the sector does follow suit.
Yep. And I think, I'd say the actual carbon black market's around 14 million tons a year. And obviously,
you said,
something like pyrolysis coming on scale, which is actually not what you're looking to do here. You're looking to do things specifically within firm system boundaries to help them hit scope 1 and 2 targets. But obviously, if you're successful in getting your technology out there or other pyrolysis process route people, then obviously that's going to put great pressure on the carbon black market that you're saying actually to expand beyond the market because
it's the quality. It's the quality
yes.
of carbon that we're producing. So it's not just the carbon black that's used for tire production, pigment dyes, and
yes.
we're making. It's a higher quality. Almost comparable or 30 times stronger than structural steel. So if we get the right type of carbon into a nanoform, it's working on a scale.
One question I wanted to get to really quickly was, we talked about the methane going in, talked about the process itself, specifically carbon emissions. What amount of carbon emissions does your process route produce?
So within the system itself, it depends on how we're powering up the unit. So on the provision that it is completely green and we're using solar and wind production, then the volumes are zero because there's no carbon intensity in there. If we're purchasing electricity, then of course...
Sorry, just to be clear, zero. So looking at the mass balance of it, at the end, you can account for everything.
Yeah. And we recycle it back into the system. So any sort of carbon that we are producing or we're not producing CO2, right? But we're, producing very small volumes of nitrogen, but that gets recycled in the system.
Yes.
But in essence, to be clear, it's zero CO2.
We've talked about the quality of the hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about the quality of the carbon, and that's obviously integral to your business model.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only interested in the hydrogen.
Sure.
Of course, I'm interested in the carbon. I want to see a space elevator.
It's a very important
things.
part to methane pyrolysis because
yes.
what the carbon black offers is a credit to the price of hydrogen. So if we want to get extremely cost competitive, the carbon market is an important factor.
Yes, of course. You have operating units. You say your technology readiness level. This isn't pie in the sky, and it's not theoretical.
No.
You are producing
Yep.
hydrogen and carbon black at the moment using this route. And I remember reading you were doing something in Botswana, aren't you? With
that's right.
someone.
So we're working with Knowhow Energy, and we've have a heads of agreement signed, so a binding heads of agreement signed. So we're currently right now producing a 100 kilowatt system that produces 135 kilograms of hydrogen per day. And we expect to have this landed in Botswana by early Q1 next year. So,
and the system we're discussing as well, it's skid mounted. What are we saying? 40-foot container?
Yeah, so the whole system fits in a 40-foot container, which is 12.3 by 3 meters by 4, I dare say.
Yeah.
And it fits into a container. And, we do all the acceptance testing in Brisbane itself. So we have a hydrogen testing facility in Brisbane, and we do all the assembly there. Our plasma, we own a company in America, that's Phoenix Solutions, and they produce our plasma systems.
Yeah.
And so we bring that and we assemble it and we send it out. All the testing is done in Brisbane.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I want to come back to the original question, which is how the economics compare between, let's say, SMR and CCS and turquoise hydrogen.
Okay. So between the two, off the cuff, you're looking at a difference in the capex. So with this steam methane reforming, your capex is significantly higher. And as well as you're also introducing systems of trying to purify the methane going into the system as well. And now with CCS, the economics behind, what is the storage cost and what is the transportation and underground storage cost is still relatively unknown. There's been a lot of work being done in the sector, and I think it'll only get better over time, so they'll have a better appreciation of what CCS capturing is all about. Whereas if you look at methane pyrolysis system, we've got carbon black. So the carbon black is in solid state, and there is, in the absence of finding a suitable market for it, there is studies right now looking into sequestering it into the ground and occupying a smaller scale footprint versus CCS.
Understood.
And I think the sentiment from the industry will be better to somewhat submerge carbon black versus CO2 in its gaseous state, because there is still the concern of leaking and bleeding through the system over a period of year.
What's the cost of production on a per kilogram basis, and not Aussie dollars, US dollars, if you please? How would you see that? Because I want people to have a sort of a feel for what level we're looking at here.
Okay, so for you, I've done most of it in Australian dollars, but to give you a bit of perspective in US dollars, we're looking per kilogram less than $7 a kilo.
Okay, and is that taking into account the carbon black?
No, it's not.
Offtake. So that's.
No, it's not.
So you're actually looking at a lower level than that.
We're looking at a lower level than that, and that is what we're trying to ascertain right now is, okay, what is the value that we can get from carbon black? Because we have a price indicative, which is, between $10,000 to $15,000, but we need to also realize what is that value too.
So I wanted to ask, I know you've just come back from the World Hydrogen Conference, it was Rotterdam, wasn't it?
It was in Rotterdam, that's right, in the Netherlands.
I don't want to ask about what the sentiment in the overall industry towards general hydrogen is. That's a big conference. There's a lot of people stalking around. What was the sentiment like towards what you are talking about today at the pyrolysis side?
Overall sentiment from the summit in Rotterdam was really interesting to see how a lot of the companies, a lot of the industry participants are becoming color agnostic towards hydrogen. So they're realizing that there needs to be a balance in the mix. It's not a singular approach towards electrolysis. The intent is for it to be green. So certification, origination is really important. So instead of looking at the various color schemes, because I think it's more of a distraction and it creates, it suddenly arises for a debate, which doesn't really result in a fruitful conversation.
So that's interesting from that perspective. I think in terms of the system boundary, what's going in, there are the questions about what's happening upstream with methane emissions, and they have to be accounted for. But in terms of scope 1 and 2 production, that would actually fit you within, in our taxonomy, the zero carbon side of things, if there's zero carbon at point of production.
What was notable in Rotterdam was the amount of support provided by the government. So even the port of Rotterdam is a brilliant showcase example of what the future would look like in terms of renewable energies, providing energy to a size of the port of Rotterdam. And to give you a bit of scale, it's the size of the port of Rotterdam is probably about almost 10 times bigger than Singapore's port.
Yeah. Which is a world scale port as well, just to be clear.
Yeah, which is really, but it just gives you that understanding and appreciation for what is at play here.
Yeah. It's a good point as well, because I think one of the dangers of when you get a lot of hydrogen people in one room together, it's not a hydrogen singularity. The danger is more of a bit of belly gazing, because it's a group of people interested in the same things, and I suppose that what most people are interested in are two things. Well, actually, maybe one thing. This is a policy response to our need to drive carbon down now, not at 2030, not at 2040. I know that those are where the ESG targets sit. The investments have to be made now, and people are looking at the practical ways that they can take down their scope 1 and 2 emissions in the very near term. And so I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Absolutely, and how energy policies are being shaped as well.
Yes.
So that going forward is definitely going to introduce some good obstacles for us to work on, and using policies to sort of redefine how is it that we are decarbonising the sector. Yeah.
And the other side as well, of course, is that the economics of it are something of a distraction. If all we talk about is the cost of production and how low we can get it, that actually delays investment decisions to a certain degree.
It does. And, different companies have different investor sentiment too. Those who probably have more of a pioneering spirit.
Yeah.
We'll see the long scale application of this and invest early. If companies are not investing now, they're too late. The investment should be made yesterday. But having said that, going forward, what does their hydrogen sector look like? And, what are the short-term decisions that can be made in order for you to have a better long-term recovery factor in there as well. And, it's a difficult decision. It's one that shouldn't be taken lightly, but it's one that should be taken with, information sharing as well. And that's what these forums are really good for. It's that we're able to share, our lessons learned, and, how does the future of hydrogen or decarbonizing sector look like?
So we're going to have to wrap up shortly. I want to just check with you. I always tend to think more towards export-sized markets, etc. And you're reorienting the way I'm thinking about it now slightly, because my prior thought was that the prerequisite for this has to be access to low-cost methane and lots of it. And so if you'd asked me before this podcast, where might this technology turn up, I wouldn't have said, an importing nation like Japan. Now, have I got that wrong? Is this therefore actually a very usable way for people who are importing via LNG, regasifying it, to take that and actually get it down to a lower, to get it down to a zero carbon gas rather than trying to do voluntary carbon offsets, for example? Is this a practical tool?
I mean, before we even get to, hydrogen export, we need to be able to produce low carbon, low hydrogen, in volumes. And the sector isn't there yet. I'm seeing very little being demonstrated in terms of the price of hydrogen for export quality. Obviously, just like the LNG industry, it took about 10 years to build the infrastructure behind it. So I totally understand the infrastructure being built up right now. But in order for it to be, used as an export quality, we really need to understand what the cost is. And coming back to LNG, when the whole domestic market around CSG was formed to try and get better, capitalizing on the value of what that price of methane was. So I think we should take that lessons learned from that sector as well and understand, okay, domestically, if we are to use hydrogen for direct applications, mobility, what have you, what is that price looking like? And, how economic is it in terms of vis-a-vis for investment? And that's where CapEx, plays a huge part to it too. What is your period? What's your payback period? And those are the decisions that need to be made by the board of companies.
So you're actually scheduled to go public next month.
We are. It's an extremely exciting and interesting time for us. So we've already been we've gone through the checks and the compliances with ASX, and now we have a listing date. So it's an extremely exciting time for Synergen Met.
Good
especially
stuff.
for the growth going forward.
What are you aiming to use the funds for, without giving too much away?
Well, in essence, it's developing our applications at scale. So now once we've understood what our partners' requirements are, now it's about time to produce this at scale.
Fantastic.
So that's what the application is going to be used for. The technology is there, and we've been refining it over the years. So now we'd just like to be able to build a company.
Yep. Well, look, really appreciate you coming in. It's a pleasure to talk as ever.
Likewise, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. Argus Hydrogen and Future Fuels will return.